Leland, you made it. You're muted, but at least you're here.
So the question is, since you're just sitting there, am I the only one that has power out still at my house?
No, you're not.
Okay, just checking.
I have power out here, and I'm at 6 South and 1117 East in Salt Lake. Where are you?
I'm in Sugar House.
Oh, okay. But the people across the street?
But what?
Uh-oh.
What'd you say, Lynn?
I said the people across the street from us have power, ironically.
Well, we'll get it back in about a week, I guess. I don't know. Who knows?
I'm here. I'm in Farmington, and this is Ann Neville. I don't have power, and I'm actually in my car driving towards Centerville so that my phone can charge.
Well, we appreciate your diligence to attend the meeting. I think it's time to call the meeting to order. It's 10:02, and we hit the magic number. We have 31 people on the line. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for participating. And thank you to Laura for organizing and making this possible. Call the meeting to order. We won't go through introductions. You can see who's here on the right-hand side of your screen. We do have a quorum. I would mention that we sent out an agenda in advance of the meeting. We heard no comment or additions to that, so I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Leland. Motion, is there a second?
Tom seconds it.
Yes, I did.
Okay, Tom. Thank you for being assertive, Tom. Is there any debate or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Any abstentions? As far as I could tell, it was unanimous. We had also distributed the meeting notes of our meeting of July 8, 2020. I received no corrections or revisions to those, so I'll entertain a motion to approve those meeting notes.
I'll make that motion. Tom Ward.
Thank you, Tom.
It.
Leland second. Any debate or discussion? All in favor say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed, nay?
Aye.
Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Okay, let's turn to the second item on our agenda, committee reports, council project status and updates. We have a lot to catch up on, and so we'll move quickly to council membership. There have been some actions taken since our last meeting. Leland, would you give a quick update?
Well, right now, everything's full. So
That's pretty quick.
there
So
was
Gage, Dina, Jeff, Richards, and Dave Livermore were all reappointed
right. And
this summer.
that means that in a year, 2 years, we have the other group, and that will be a challenge because of the term limits. So we'll have to see what happens.
Well, we may have a little turnover, do you think?
Well, could do.
Okay, well, thanks for your efforts, Leland, in getting that paperwork done and getting those actions taken. Welcome to those who have been reappointed. The next item on the agenda is an update on the activities of the Salinity Advisory Committee. Laura, will you give us that update?
Yeah, at the last advisory council meeting, I did give a kind of more detailed update about what the committee was doing, so I'll just give a real brief one today. The standard operating procedures for the Salinity Advisory Committee have been finalized, and now the group has broken into two different subcommittees, the ecology subcommittee and the geochemistry subcommittee, and those groups are working on a decision framework for ideal salinity ranges, and that is where they are busy with their efforts right now. They're also working all together with Jeff on a research and monitoring framework. The subcommittee meetings are going to be held later this month, I think next week, the 14th and the 18th. And then the whole Salinity Advisory Committee will come back together on October 7th to talk about finalizing the monitoring and research framework. And just to give you all a background, this is to help us to help the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands once the railroad is done with their limit or their term of monitoring the breach in the causeway, and it becomes the divisions to manage. We want to make sure that we have the best available science and data and supporters out there to help us make decisions regarding the breach. So thanks to everyone that's helping on that. And then moving on, Don, if I may, to the tech
Well,
team.
let's see if there are any questions first. Laura, any questions or comments about the Salinity Advisory Committee activities? Okay, thank you, Laura. Let's move on to the next agenda item then, the report on the Great Salt Lake Technical Team, which is the technical advisor to the council.
Yeah, and the tech team met yesterday despite all of the crazy weather. We had a presentation by Greg Carling from BYU. He presented on some a tech team grant project that he had been working on. The title is Identifying Dust Sources Along the Wasatch Front. And I also have that meeting recorded, and if you guys are interested in hearing more of detail on his presentation, I will make that available. But he basically looked at playa dust, urban dust, and snow dust, and where that dust is coming from. Looks like, surprise, surprise, the majority of the dust is coming from the regional playas around the Wasatch Front, Sevier Lake, Great Salt Lake Desert. Were his conclusions, and the urban air pollution and one of his other significant findings was that urban air pollution causes enrichment in specific trace elements relative to playa dust sources. One other thing to note about Carling's research is that he just got a NSF grant to continue studying dust along the Wasatch Front for the next 5 years in a dust squared study. So we could be hearing more from him on dust as it relates to the Great Salt Lake and the Wasatch Front. So definitely helpful to keep that, to keep up on his research there. Jeff also presented a more detailed look at the Salinity Advisory Committee and what the group is doing there. The next Great Salt Lake Tech Team meeting will be held on December 8th, where we're going to talk to or have a presentation from USGS on some work they've been doing on monitoring around the causeway breach, a presentation on Great Salt Lake wetlands by the Wild Utah Project, and quite possibly some discussion on the inland port. So with that, I'll take any questions on tech team meetings.
That was a remote meeting, correct?
Yep.
Laura?
Yep.
Okay. Any questions or comments on tech team or Carling's work?
Laura, this is Tom. On the tech team, is it okay if we want to just sit in and listen? It's a little easier now with being remote, if that's okay.
Please, yeah, it's just fine. In an effort to kind of formalize and get more tech team members involved and on board, we have renominated a specific group of tech team members, and I'd like to hear from them during each meeting, talking about how issues that they're working on pertain to the lake. But and so they're put on the spot maybe once or twice during a meeting, but anyone is welcome to call in and listen. So
Listen. Okay, thanks.
Other questions or comments about the tech team from its meeting yesterday? Okay, great. Thanks, Laura.
mhm.
Next, brief update on the legal analysis and review of select water strategies from Great Salt Lake. As you know, in the face of continuing declines in water levels, in 2017, our advisory council commissioned an effort to collect and compile possible strategies to maintain or enhance water levels in Great Salt Lake. The effort identified and explained a total of 72 strategies. In 2018, the council reviewed and prioritized the top strategies, And then in 2019, the council authorized a legal analysis and feasibility study of 12 of the top priority strategies. Earlier this year, we retained a consortium of the law firm Clyde Snow and the engineering firm Jacobs to conduct that feasibility study. That consortium presented its conclusions at our last meeting, and the report was accepted by the council. Just an update, after a quick final edit, the formal study was submitted, and each of you should have received that electronically. It's also been posted on our website. There are two matters of unfinished business on that project. One is the completion of an executive summary. It's near completion, a 4-page glossy, such as we've done with our other reports. And in addition to that, the contractor is providing a tool I think will be very useful, and that is a 2-page fact sheet, they're calling it, on each of the 12 strategies, which will drill down a little deeper than the 4-page executive summary. Those should be completed this month, and as soon as they are, we'll provide them to you as well as post them on the website. So thanks to our contractor. I think Jeff Denblaker's here today. I don't know if Emily Lewis is on the line, but thanks for their good work. Any questions about that project? Okay, next on the agenda is an update on the public relations communication strategy. As you may recall, earlier in the year, we retained public relations firm R&R Partners to help get the news out about council-driven reports that have been completed recently. That was in response to concerns that we were doing a lot of good work and it was maybe gathering dust on the shelf and not really getting good coverage. And so that contract also provided training to our new GSL coordinator, Laura, on media relations, talking points, etc. They prepared some talking points for her, and when the feasibility study was issued, they prepared a press release and lined up a number of interviews. I know that I did 4 interviews with KSL Radio, Deseret News, Salt Lake Tribune, and forgot the name, Rod Arquette's, what does he call it, iHeartRadio. And you may have seen some additional coverage. I know Laura did a couple of television interviews with Fox and Channel 2. So we got a lot more coverage than we typically do. And their contract is continuing for a period of time, and they should be able to help us and especially train Laura in handling these media relations. Any questions about that project or activity?
Don, this is Dave. Congratulations. Terrific coverage and well-deserved. I'm just curious if there is a central clearinghouse for the links and the articles. Is that on the website?
I don't believe they are, Laura. Laura has them, and I know she shared a link with the Deseret News article. I'm not sure if you've done the others, Laura.
You know, I have not yet put them all together. R&R Partners is supposed to be supplying me with a kind of summary report and links to all the articles. So I will get with them to see if they can provide that to me, all of the different media outlets that captured the reports. And then I'll share that with the council.
Okay, tremendous job, really outstanding.
But one thing I'd like to say, if I may, about the press coverage that just came out was, you know, I think it was important for us when we started working with R&R to show, like Don said, about all of the reports that have come out in the last 2 years, including the economic study, the Drying Lake study. And so I think the press release, I mean, the point we wanted to make was that the press release that just came out wasn't simply about the Clyde Snow report. It was about all of the work that the council has been, you know, getting out there in the last couple of years, you know, the costs of the drying lake and the impacts of drying lake beds around the world. So it's not just this one study, but we tried to have R&R help us highlight a lot of the studies that have been done recently. So hopefully that came through. And I think that's why we got a lot of attention, is because we had some of those numbers to back up, you know, the economic costs of the lake. I think that was helpful. So yeah, it's about a bigger picture, not just the one report.
One other thing to add to that would be that the study we're going to discuss today, we're going to use R&R also to get that report out, because we think it ties together all of the issues that we're drawing, and now what can you do? And we're going to talk more in that study on the conservation effort. I think the press will probably pick that up pretty well. I'm hoping.
Thank you, Leland. Other comments or questions?
Don, this is Tom.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was curious if I want to second the kudos on the press release and everything else, but I'm curious what level of outreach we are to the politicians, the stakeholders. Examples I would give, like Utah League of Cities and Towns and others. I forwarded the articles to my administration, and as well as copies of the executive summaries of I'll say the 3 most recent reports. Do we have, either in the past or strategically moving forward, something that we're reaching out with for the folks that really can do something with the information beyond the the public support or the political support?
We've had a process, Tom, in the past with our annual reports and our reports of doing 2 things. One, making sure every legislator, House member and senator, receives a copy of that. And secondly, we've tried to distribute it among agency personnel. We've been a little sporadic. We've had meetings with them on some and just shared it on others. So I think R&R is helping us get a little more organized. And now with Laura as the Great Salt Lake coordinator, she'll have some time and an ability to organize and coordinate more of that outreach, I think.
Okay, kind of what I was thinking, and maybe this has already happened, and I'd be happy to help. And we've got new leadership in several divisions, including natural resources, but also a new state water rights engineer, and then we have other entities. So I'd be curious to see the list of who we need to reach out to and who's tagging who, and be happy to support Laura and you in that effort.
Right, thank you. I would give a little disclaimer. It goes without saying that when you put words out there, you have very little control over how they come out. We did not approach editorial boards, for example, and yet the Tribune published 2 separate editorials with their views, and I try to make it clear as a spokesperson for the advisory council that our role here is to inform the debate, and that these studies, every word of these studies aren't necessarily our words. For example, a feasibility study, those are the words of Jacobs and Clyde Snow, and our role is to inform the debate. It doesn't always come across that way, and you don't control how it comes across in the media, and so I hope people will take what they hear and what they see with a grain of salt. I try to do a good job of making clear who the authors of the reports are and what the questions were that we're asking the reports. But once the word's out there, you sometimes lose control of the focus and the emphasis. That's my disclaimer.
Of course, there is the comment from a friendly legislator who said, perhaps it's a good thing when the Tribune editorial board comes out and tells us that we didn't do far enough on anything.
Any other questions or comments? Great. Let's keep moving then. The next update we have is for HCR 10 committee. As you may recall, in 2019, the legislature adopted HCR 10, which basically directed that the Departments of Natural Resources and Environmental Quality jointly and collaboratively engage a wide range of stakeholders to develop recommendations for policies and other solutions to ensure adequate water flows to Great Salt Lake. To help make that happen, we funded a facilitator to help them develop their report back to the legislature. And I've asked Tim Hawks, who is the author of that legislation and who's participated in those meetings, to give a brief update and status report on the HCR 10 committee deliberations. And Tim was without power this morning. I hope he found a place to call in. Are you on, Tim? Someone want to pretend they're Tim? Well, he's not here. I don't know if there's someone here who would take a couple minutes and who's participated in the process and just give us an update.
Dawn, this is Marcel. I won't pretend to be Tim, but I'm happy to give an update.
Terrific.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you. Welcome.
Okay, thanks. All right, welcome. Thank you very much. Yes, and hello, council members and audience. So yes, you portrayed it right that the resolution passed in 2019 asked the Departments of Natural Resources and Environmental Quality to engage broadly to try to help come up with policy recommendations and solutions to ensure adequate water flows to Great Salt Lake and its wetlands. And the legislature, well, actually the resolution encourages a report back to the legislature and the governor by November 30th of 2020. So the Departments of Natural Resources and Environmental Quality established a steering committee, and Representative Hawks worked with the directors of those agencies to get that steering committee set up. And Jeff, right offhand, I think there's like 17 or 18 members. Largely, they represent many of the agencies within Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Quality, representatives from the waterfowl, from the Compass Minerals, from environmental and conservation organizations, cities, and what other big category am I missing? Agriculture. And so that group has been working since about January, and they've come up with, they kind of broke up into 4 subgroups to come up with ideas around agriculture, municipal and industrial, and land use and water planning, integrated water management and coordination, as well as, what is the other topic I'm forgetting, Jeff? Or did I say them all? There were 4: immigration, coordination. Oh, yes.
Legal.
Legal, thank you. So how could we forget that? Thanks, Lynn. Anyway, that group has been working on a set of opportunities, is what they're calling them. The work that Clyde Snow and Jacobs came out with has been helping to inform that, but the outcomes from the steering group are broader than what's in the Clyde Snow report, and there's Representative Hawks. So we view those as they're complementary, and at this point, the group is winding their way towards solidifying a set of about 17 topics of recommendations, and those will be presented in October to the Utah Water Task Force, and then to the Legislative Water Development Committee in November. And so there has been a little bit of confusion about what the steering group is doing and the report they're coming out, and the Clyde Snow and Jacobs report that came out. But I think that there is an effort to kind of clarify that there've been different processes. They're complementary. There's some, shall we say, overlap, or they complement one another. And in some cases, there are a lot of things coming out of the steering group that are not necessarily part of the strategies report. Representative Hawks, did you want to add anything to that? I don't know how much you heard.
Thanks, Marcel. I heard only the last about 30 seconds, but it sounds like you covered it pretty well. So Marcel's been centrally involved in that process as well, and I think it's headed to a good place. I'm happy to help answer any questions the group may have.
Jeff, do you have any comments on that at all?
No, I think she covered it well.
Great, thank you. Jeff is the facilitator.
Which, by the way, thanks to the council very much for sponsoring the facilitator, because that has made a world of difference in helping a lot of busy people manage to get coordinated and work together and be able to collect all their thoughts and keep the ball rolling.
Any questions or comments? Thank you for jumping in, Marcel.
Mhm.
As Dave, I'd just like to thank Tim for his legislative leadership to getting us to this place where HR 10 is robust and having a great discussion. And this is another really huge step forward. So thanks, Tim, and others involved in getting the legislation passed and now in helping to sponsor the dialogue. And Jeff, you too.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. I will say the strength of that HCR 10 group is really the breadth of the group that's engaged on it. Having some agricultural producers engaged is really valuable as well, and I think it's going to help some of those recommendations stick and really shape discussions moving forward.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to make a note.
Hey, Don,
This is Tom. Tim, your presentation at the Executive Water Task Force, I think that was well done and well received. And as everyone knows here, that's a group that needs to be on board with what's happening with the Great Salt Lake. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tom.
Don, can I throw one thing in that's not quite on this subject, but because we mentioned the Executive Water Task Force, the Water Strategies program is on their agenda this afternoon. So if anybody wants to listen in on that, you can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Leland. Any other comments or questions? All right, let's move from the project updates to project report. Earlier in the year, we partnered with the Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, who retained the firm of Bowen and Collins to conduct a study to address the following questions or topics. Make a preliminary examination of the impacts of water conservation to large water development projects. Determine what is necessary to maintain adequate water supplies in the future without additional water development projects. Address the question, would conservation alone be sufficient to meet future water demands without water development projects? And to lay out a roadmap of what future studies might be required to further understand how conservation impacts water development projects. And so that report is near complete. I think needs a few final edits is all, and so we would expect to be able to distribute it to the group soon, along with an executive summary. We've invited Thane Clark and Keith Larson of Bowen Collins to meet with us today to give their report on what's being called Conservation Impact Study. So I don't know who's going to lead out, Thane or Keith, but
I'll start.
You have about 35 minutes for your presentation and Q&A.
All right. Can everybody hear me then? Make sure my sound is working. Okay, good. Keith, you can pull up. Keith and I are going to tag team a little bit here. Go ahead and pull up the presentation, Keith. You know, we'll be brief on the introductions. We've been tasked, as Don said, I think that gives a good summary of what we're tasked with. The real focus has been, you know, water resource planning, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Go to the next slide. The reason why I pull up this next slide, it's interesting. I just have to start off with a little story, and I've studied water resources and been in water resources for well over 20 years. Early in my career, I had a neighbor who also was had studied in the engineering field, and he had just bought a boat, and we were just having a neighborhood chat, and he's like, you know, don't you love this fact that I can just turn my sprinklers on and I just get charged a flat rate, and I could just, you know, I could do whatever I want and I don't get charged. Isn't that wonderful? And I thought, well, maybe for some people. And not even 3 minutes later into the conversation, he talked about the new boat that he bought, and he was unable to dock at Deer Creek at his favorite dock because Deer Creek was so low. And it was kind of shocking to me that he hadn't necessarily made the connection between letting his sprinklers run 24 hours a day and the level of the reservoir at Deer Creek, out of which his irrigation water came from. And so it was shocking because he was supposed to be well-informed, well-educated, but he had never made the connection. And so I think I think part of what we're doing here and what Clyde and Snow and Jacobs put together is helping to inform the conversation. I think we need to educate people with real data and real studies and help inform them of how things are connected, how our water's connected to the natural system, how it impacts the economy as well. You know, I've worked in water resources for 20 years, and 15 of those years or so has been working on the Bear River Project. Bear River Development Project. Now, before I make too many enemies right off the bat, it has been a very enlightening process for me as well to understand and work closely with water managers in the planning of water resources, but also to work closely with many of you who've helped educate me on the importance of the natural systems and their connection to water. I think in this introduction, I've also worked for well over 10 years on the hydrologic systems of the Great Salt Lake in one form or another, working closely at times with Compass Minerals as well, and that's also opened my eyes to you know, the beauty of the Great Salt Lake and the importance of it. I don't think the Great Salt Lake needs much of an introduction. I think many of you are passionate about it. One thing I would mention, we all understand it's important, but one thing I've noticed in all the discussions, maybe that's missing a little bit, is that you know, I work a lot for farmers in irrigation water, and their goal is to help feed the world in their production. What's interesting is we look at the Great Salt Lake and its contribution to also feeding the world. We look at the brine shrimp industry that helps to enhance the aquaculture, which helps feed people, and also the hundreds of thousands of tons of fertilizer that comes off of the Great Salt Lake minerals, this process there, many of it organic and natural form to enhance agricultural food production. That you know, we see the Great Salt Lake giving a lot, and as we look at the system as a cycle, we can all give in our own ways to the system. Many of you enjoy birds, others enjoy just the open space, but what's become clear to me is that the importance of the Great Salt Lake goes beyond economic, but you know, helping to feed and to feed our spirits as well. It's a great place to be. Many of you that have been out there. So before you tag me as the enemy of the Great Salt Lake, because I have worked on the Bear River Project, I think it's done nothing but open up my eyes more towards the importance of it. And I think many of the water managers understand that. So as we jump into this, the title of it's Water Conservation Impact Study. That's a pretty broad title. We've looked much closer at the impacts of water conservation. When we talk water conservation, we're talking municipal industrial water conservation. The impacts of that on water resource planning. In the 10 or 15 years that I've worked on the Bear River Project, that was never part of the scope of that initial study that Division of Water Resources put out. And I always felt like it was a key component. So to see this topic come up and that we're able to bring Keith Larson from our office in on this has been a great thing. And Keith has worked well over 20 years on water resource planning and helping water districts understand their supplies and their projected demands, help them get their arms around population numbers. And he's worked parallel with me in an industry. We both for well over 20 years, and it's been fun working with Keith on this project. So just to tie this in briefly with, you see the little house there on the right, strategy number 5. We do feel like that a lot of the work that we do at looking at conservation requires that those foundational strategies be focused on as well. But I think the overall public view of things, really the strategy number 5 is something that everybody can help on. It's going to be hard for the general public to work on shepherding water. That's a legal issue. It's a policy issue. But number 5 is really hands-on, and I think that's it's great that the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council has chosen to focus on this, and it's been our pleasure to work on this. It's been a fun little study. So the purpose was to look at the impacts on water resource planning, namely large water development projects, and then develop an action plan or list of studies where we could outline prioritized studies we feel like need to happen to help people understand their connection with water, but also the importance of conserving it. Next slide, Keith. I think I'll turn the time over to you after this, but maybe just to point out, being our focus on this, looking at the timing of large water development projects, this is an example of the Bear River Development Project timing. If you'll notice that when we first started talking about the Bear River Project during the Development Act in 1991, it had a projected need of 2015. And even on into 1997, it was still considered to be needed by 2015. And Keith is going to go over some of the details of this, and you'll see why that was anticipated need because of our usage rates and what we projected in terms of population. In 2004, we started to realize it's starting to slip. And by 2010, 2014, we knew it was going to be out towards 2035 is when we needed the Bear River Project. And now lately, the state just issued earlier, what was that, late last year, the statement that it's probably not needed until 2045 and 2050, primarily to conservation efforts. And we see that the conservation plays an important role in the timing of these large projects. Because of the expense of the projects, conservation has definitely been a hot topic for a lot of the water districts. So that being the overall purpose, and mostly what Keith is going to review here in a few minutes is how conservation has affected the timing of large projects, but also how it could affect the timing and what needs to be done maybe to affect the timing specifically to push it beyond 2065. So I'll turn the time over to Keith here.
So with that introduction, let me talk about the details of what we did. This is a limited analysis in scope and budget. So we really had to focus on existing data. You're not going to see a lot of new analysis here outside of gathering what's already been there. So we looked at supply and demand data from districts and from the Division of Water Rights, water use database, looked at the projected need based on future growth projections, and then looked at the impact of both historic conservation efforts and expected future conservation efforts. Those future efforts are largely based on the Division of Water Resources' recent regional conservation goals program. And so that is something we'll look at and talk about here. And then look at additional conservation required to postpone water development projects beyond our planning window of 2065. We haven't made any attempt to say what happens after that, but we have looked at our projections through 2065 and what that means. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, and then you're going to see a whole bunch that look exactly like it or similar to it that we can go through a little faster. This is Bear River Water Conservancy District, and this is a comparison of projected demand and supply through 2065, starting in 2015. So what we have is the solid area portion of the graph is supplies, and I've grouped them into culinary and secondary supplies. That information is taken from both their master plan and information collected by the Division of Water Resources. On top of that, we have also included estimates from the division relative to agricultural water conversion from agricultural water to M&I usage. And they include both a high and low estimate, and so that we've included those numbers there as well. On top of those supplies, we have projected demands based on the Kem Gardner Institute population projections. And essentially what we're showing are a couple things. Number one, if you look at the dashed black line here, that is demand based on what 2015 water use was. And that's, in this case, 318 gallons per capita per day. So basically, if we just took 318, we projected that out based on the Kem Gardner projections, we see what that growth would do. We've also put on a couple other lines here that provide some interest. One is what demand was in 2005. And I hate, we did this alphabetically, but I hate to bring up Bear River first because 2005 water use actually shows a little bit lower at 282. However, we have some questions as to how accurate that data was, and it involved a number of estimates in 2005. So I'm not really sure that use has actually gone up for Bear River, but that is the data that we have there. And you'll see as we look at the other districts that in general, outside of this one, it does appear that we have been achieving some good results through conservation. And then very last is we include what the demand would be if Bear River were to achieve the regional conservation goals. The regional goals are set only through 2030, but there are some estimates of what future goals may be, and so we've gone ahead and put those into the model. And that includes dropping water use to 236 gallons per day by the year 2065. And so you can kind of see where that looks. So if you look at this particular chart, you would conclude that for Bear River, even at current water use levels, we're in pretty good shape out through 2065. And that's based on these Kem Gardner projections. However, yeah, go ahead.
Can I interrupt, Mr. Chair? This is Commissioner Scott. Just a couple of things. I know that this is, as you mentioned, that this is existing data. A couple of things. Tremonton City has started a secondary water system. And so they've actually acquired some Bear River Canal Company shares and are using those for mandatory secondary water throughout the entire municipality. And that should be built out within the next 2 years. So that should alleviate a lot of their culinary use issues. The other thing that we've mentioned to the Gardner Policy Institute, we think that their numbers as far as growth are woefully low. With the building permits that we're seeing right now, we expect the growth rate to be approximately double what they're forecasting, just because of the home prices along the Wasatch Front and the number of new developments we already have in progress.
Yeah, and that's a great lead into this next slide, which is just talking about that difference between what Kem Gardner has and what the district is actually projecting. And so what we did was we went and looked at historic growth. You can see this is, goes out forever, kind of, what would happen in the future. So we looked at historic growth, and if you look at the Kem Gardner projections, they basically plug along at the historic growth out to 2065. And if we just carry them out, they would continue there. However, if you look at the amount of property that's available in the area, you could see populations up to 650,000 at some point, just at current densities, not even increased densities. And so the Water Conservancy District's master plan actually identifies projections that are, as you mentioned, much more aggressive. And you can see, we've extrapolated that out into the future. They are more indicative of what would happen if Box Elder County, in this case, were to develop more like a urban population center, or suburban population center anyway, rather than the type of rural community that it has historically been. So one of the big questions coming out of this study is, what is the future of Box Elder County and perhaps Cache County as well. Does it look like what it has historically, or do those development pressures push it upwards? And so we didn't attempt to answer which of those visions is the case, but we did want to revise our analysis to reflect that higher level of population projection, and that's what's shown here. And so what we see here is we see a different picture if those more aggressive population projections were to occur. In this case, we run out of available supply, around the year 2035 for an aggressive, and 3 or 4 years later, even with the high estimates of ag conversion. At the regional goals, we're okay if we get the high level of ag conversion water estimated, but we actually need to put more conservation in place if we kind of want to guarantee ourselves that we can reach that 2065 without having to develop additional water beyond that. So essentially what we've done here is we've updated that for the population projections as you've indicated, and then we've identified what would need to be the goal to postpone the project beyond 2065. Now, obviously, there's a lot of unknowns or things that could be additionally refined, and we're going to talk about that right at the end of this presentation about the additional things that need to happen. But that's essentially what the analysis then identifies is where we need to be to put that beyond 2065. Okay, so if that kind of makes sense, any big picture questions on what I presented thus far? Because I'm now going to jump to the other 3 districts and show these same results for the other districts.
I have a question, Keith. This is Tom Ward. And maybe just you can punt it till later if you're going to address it. In my conversation with district managers, one of the issues to meet these goals is they don't control land use planning. So maybe that's a different meeting, or maybe we're covering it later, but to achieve 220, what land use planning for new development and redevelopment is required. I'll leave it to your discretion where you plug that in.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about what's required to hit these goals here after we talk about reaching them. And then I think that's a great point that you make. And if I don't cover it, then let's talk about it again. Bring it up again, please.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead.
Keith,
yes.
This is Trevor Nelson from Bear River Canal. With your box elder projections here, you're holding secondary water as steady through that period. Could you run me through why your secondary water is stagnant?
So I think a couple of things. First one is these are based on the estimates that come from the current plan identified by the Water Conservancy District. So I have not done a detailed analysis of those secondary supplies, and that is something that we've identified as an area that needs a little more attention to look at into the future. The other thought is that one thing is a lot of this ag conversion water, we suspect that is going to go into your secondary system, into secondary supplies there. And so any ag water that is converted over to secondary is represented in the orange up above and not necessarily the green.
Okay. Because that's what we're seeing on the ground here is our biggest share movements in the last 5 years, and what we project forward is going to be kind of replace in place.
Yes.
As we see housing developments go in, the same acreage that was irrigated with Bear River Canal Company water is now owned by the municipality that operates that area, and then they are putting in secondary systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what is reflected in this ag conversion right there.
Okay, thank you.
I will note that, not all ground that gets developed has ag water associated with it right now. in both Cache and Bear River, there's a significant amount of ground that does not have ag water currently irrigating it. And so that kind of goes into some of these projections of ag to M&I conversion. And the other thing I will note, just while we're on this topic, is ag to M&I conversion is another area where we've used the best available data from water resources, but everybody understands that there needs to be additional examination to refine those numbers moving forward. Sorry, I'll pause one last time for any other questions, and then. Okay, let's go ahead and talk Cache Water District for a second. We've done the exact same thing with Cache, and again, we have the Chem Gardner projections shown, and things look pretty good. The one thing I will note is that Cache is showing some conservation since 2005 that does push out, you know, just if we looked at, let's just look at the most conservative scenario here, you know, we would have needed additional source in 2050-ish, and we've postponed that 5 years or so just by the conservation we've achieved over the last 10 years. And if you get the regional conservation goals, again, we're pulling ourselves down into available water. So Cache has the same challenge as Box Elder, as what does it end up looking like in the future if we continue to see, again, the more aggressive suburban/urban type growth in this area, then we end up with more aggressive growth curve, which then pushes us to the point where we have to, the regional conservation goal gets us most of the way if we can stay within the high estimate. At the low estimate, we actually need a little more conservation to get down to 184. So I'll pause there just to give you a chance to look at those numbers real briefly. And actually, we're going to summarize it here in just a minute, so I'll keep moving. So the next district alphabetically here is Jordan Valley, and we jump up significantly in size relative to total acre feet being used. Jordan Valley, we don't have the same question of population growth. We have a better understanding on what Salt Lake County will be looking like. And so in this particular case, what we've done is we have included the total supply, and Jordan Valley, the way they do their planning, it is all just grouped. And so we put in that total supply. This does include their estimate of future reductions in supply associated with climate change. And we do show where they have traditionally shown Bear River in the past. And so this one is a really interesting one because of a couple things. Number one, we look at what water use was in 2000, up at 251 gallons per day. Had that continued, we would be to the point where, and this is with, again, with climate change. So this would be a little bit higher now, but we're basically to the point where we would have needed that in the next few years here, 2025. But by pushing the water use down over the last 15 years in their case, we've pushed that out to close to 2040, even beyond that. With regional conservation goals, we can get all the way out to 2060. And with a little more conservation, we could push that outside the planning window if we could get down to 160 gallons per capita per day. Okay, we did have a question on with Jordan Valley if we also eliminated some additional supplies, which included some of their new development supplies, and that ends up just requiring additional demand, or excuse me, additional conservation down to 144 gallons per capita per day.
And maybe I'll jump in really quick, Keith. The reason for that was that those additional supplies that are shown on top hatched were supplies taking water out of the Utah Lake system. And so it was interesting to see. It's not only the Bear River project that does take water. And we all understand there's many projects that have been taking water from the Great Salt Lake system, but these were projects viewed as maybe possibly just appendages to the Bear River project, and not bad by any means, but just part of the water planning portfolio of Jordan Valley. But it was more of an interesting exercise to look at what type of conservation was required to do no large water development projects for Jordan Valley. And so that pushes us way down to the 144 gallons per capita per day.
That was the purpose of that. Weber Basin is a little different from some of the entities in that the way that it was created, it has some pretty strict limitations on how water is used both between potable and secondary. And so what we did here was we looked on the potable side first. And what we found is that we end up needing water, even with regional conservation goals, out towards the end of the planning window. And these are the potable numbers only. I'm going to show a combined graph here, but just keep in mind that they are showing some need out here. And really, without conservation, it would be all the way up at 2030 on the way potable is set up. When we go to secondary, however, the district is in much better shape. But you can see the secondary situation here, and perhaps of most interest is the combined situation. And I will strongly emphasize that the way they're set up right now, they can't just shift water between the two, but it still seemed an interesting exercise to combine them to see if we could find ways legally to move the water. What does it look like? And in this particular case, again, you can see that in 2005 water use, we actually would have needed that water relatively. I mean, we're showing a need today, actually. But with the conservation that has been achieved, this is being pushed out to 2035. And with regional conservation goals, we can push out beyond the 2065 window without additional conservation beyond the regional goals. Again, emphasizing that, however, with potable, as we looked up above, until you figure out how to get secondary and potable sources to mix, you're still showing a little bit of a need out here at the end. Okay, I'm cognizant of my time, so I'm trying to go through here quick, but a lot of good information to present. So this is just a summary of what has been the impact of conservation on the timing of specifically the Bear River development, but large water development projects. And basically this shows, historic water use. This is when we would have needed it. 2015 water use. This is where we project needing it. If we can get the regional goals, here's where it happens. And if we can hit that with additional conservation that we're calling it, we can push things out beyond 2065. So to Tom's question earlier, here's just a summary of what that means in terms of per capita water use and the percentages of reduction required. This is for the regional goals. This is to get the need for development postponed beyond 2065. And graphically, that looks like this. This is how those numbers change with each of those points.
Now again, maybe we just emphasize with this graph that we're not tasked right now, nor do we have the data to look beyond the 2065. But I'm sure that many of you are thinking that population won't stop growing after 2065. But this is just looking in the 2065 planning window. Beyond that, then that's for other studies, I guess, or just ongoing planning as we always do.
Yeah. So to Tom's question, what does this mean? What's the required action to achieve these conservation scenarios? Included in the report is a big detailed table. I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but I do want to hit a couple of highlights. So this is for Bear River, this is for Cache, and we'll look at Jordan Valley and Weber Basin here in a moment. But for all of these, I wanted to highlight, all of these basically have the same indoor activities that need to happen. High efficiency faucets and showers estimated at currently about 80%. That needs to get to near 100. We know 100 is probably not likely, but near 100%. High efficiency toilets, 63%. Those need to get to near 100, including 10% at ultra high efficiency. Or that's for the regional goals. Or for the additional conservation, we need to get to close to 75% ultra high efficiency. And all of these, there's some give and take, right? You could do a little bit less in one area and more in another, but this gives you a feel for what needs to happen. High efficiency washing machines, 46 to 100%, and reduction in leaks and other indoor water use, 20% at the regional conservation goal and 50% at the additional conservation level. Here's Jordan Valley and Weber Basin, but let me jump to outdoor as well. So those were all common. Outdoor is a little bit different depending on where you're at. So there's 3 areas where we're going to need to achieve change in order to reach those goals. One area is our irrigation efficiency. So what we did is we said, what is the best level of expected efficiency? This is from the regional conservation goals. And the assumption was that for sprinklered systems, we can get about 70% efficient, and for drip systems, we can get 80% or more. If we use those numbers, each of these entities are estimated to be at this current level of the best expected. Jordan Valley is 83%, Cache is 70%, etc. So basically what we would expect is that they would need to get from wherever they're at today up to that level of best expected. And so the darker green shows how much improvement that they need to make there. As Tom mentioned, another thing that's going to need to happen is our lot size is going to need to decrease. And so this shows current lot use sizes as of 2015 and what would be needed to achieve the additional conservation. And I've shown a percentage in terms of total lot size reduction. A lot of those are kind of happening organically. The trends are for smaller household sizes, etc. Or it's not household sizes, but lot sizes, more density. But those are the numbers that would need to be hit by 2065 to achieve those goals. And then lastly, on the outdoor, obviously, we're going to need to do a little bit better in our landscaping. And so I don't have a current breakdown on between the different entities. I just have a total number of estimated for the Wasatch Front. About 70%, just shy of 70% of our landscapes are cool season turf grasses right now that are higher water use. To meet our goals, we would need to move some properties to more efficient, water efficient, more water-wise landscaping options. That could be hardscapes, that could be perennials and shrubs, that could be lower water use turf options. But essentially for existing properties by 2065, we would need to get the numbers from 70% to the values shown here. And you can see the different districts. For new properties, we're making the assumption that it will be easier to reach those goals for new properties. And so this is the amount of turf grasses that we would need to reach those goals based on the current numbers. Just editorially, there's significant action that is going to need to occur if we are to reach those goals. And I think you can kind of see that there's some significant changes that would need to occur if we're going to make those goals. So I think, I guess, Tom or others, we just have one last slide, which is to summarize the additional studies that need to happen. But before we go there, do we have some questions you want to talk about on this information?
I have a quick question, Keith. Have you put numbers on either a number of the cost, the investment? I think one of the questions that I get is, if we have to spend a couple $2 billion on getting a new water supply, how much would we have to spend on retrofitting our landscapes to the xeric ones, like you just mentioned? Is there even a range that we could, redirect that money towards a different water resource, if you will?
Yeah, the Regional Conservation Goals study has some preliminary numbers, but I think we didn't attempt to define that here, and I think that's an area of needed additional study.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Don? Or others?
Hey, Keith, this is Leland.
Yeah.
Just, not that it's a question, but what would it take, and is the data readily available? So this could be for you and Thane, to repeat this kind of a graph presentation on Salt Lake City, Metro Water, perhaps even Central Utah, and Orem and Trouble if we're throwing them all in.
Yeah, so I think this data roughly exists for all those entities that you've talked about, and so we could we could repeat this analysis for those with the same limitations that we have today. We'd have to rely on their supply, we'd have to rely on Chem Gardner projections, etc.
Keith, this is Joanna Interwada. Can you hear me?
Not very well.
I have a question, and the question is, it's kind of related to the one Tom asked about, of the relationship of land use planning to these water projections. And you've covered a lot about the residential sector. What's the relationship between these larger conservation goals and the economic development strategies of the state, of what kinds of industries and businesses they're attempting to attract to the state, and the relationship of that with potential water conservation? So the whole CII sector.
Yes, so I'm not going to attempt to answer that question because it's a tough one and it's a big one. I will note that we do include CII conservation in our analysis here. We are not putting the full burden on residential. We follow the same approach as in the regional conservation goals, as that's the data that we had. But I think you're right, and that's another study that I think needs to be fleshed out at some point.
Other questions?
Keith, just to note, I think there's a couple questions in the chat box. If you want to pull that up, it's up in the right-hand corner.
What's the assumption being used on lot coverage in relation to lot sizes? I would need to go look at that data. Again, that comes from the regional conservation goals model. which did look at an analysis of landscaped area. And so that does vary by county and comes from that data.
And Laura, this is Dina Blaze. This is my question because at least in the Office of Regional Development in Salt Lake County, we're obviously have been for quite some time and seeing a lot more PUDs and different kinds of development than what you would see in a standard subdivision lot that you might have seen 10 or 15 years ago. So I think the open spaces and the irrigation of those open and shared spaces, we might need to help have a refined understanding of how those impact the ability to reach these irrigation efficiencies that you're showing here.
Yeah. And that's one great point is that there is a relationship between all of these irrigation issues: efficiency, lot size, and turf coverage. So if you decrease lot size further from what we've shown here, you have some flexibility in the other areas. And this is just one possible example of a combination that could be used to reach the goals.
Thank you for that additional info.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Zach Frankel from Utah Rivers Council. I appreciate the chance to chime into this. I've never seen a forecast that looked at all the land mass in an area and pretty much assumed 100% development rate of the land mass. If you think about it, it's a little bit backwards because here in Salt Lake County, for example, we still haven't reached build out. And it's been developed for 70 plus years. So I think if the assumption in Box Elder County or Cache County is 100% development of all the land mass, that means no more farming. It means no more farming and ranching. And that also means that ag water has got to go somewhere. I mean, I think there's first a conversation to be had is to pay 100% of its farmland, especially in the breadbasket of Utah. Those two counties produce almost a third of the ag goods in Utah, number one. And number two, all that water is going to lead to a growth in water supply in excess of what's been presented in this data. So that's something to consider. And I think the other thing in talking about the conservation goals that the Utah Division of Water Resources revised last year, it's important to note that the water conservation goals in Utah between 2000 and 2019 were set by Governor Herbert to be a reduction of 1% per year. And the water conservation goal revision process of last year changed the long-term water conservation goal to reduce it down to 0.5% per year over the 50-year period. So they reduced the water conservation planning. If you're doing a water conservation study, it would be great if you could look at what a 1% per year savings might be, or if we could look at a 2% per year reduction in water use, because it's a study, so let's ask the questions. 2% per year reduction in municipal water use is significant. And I think that it's really important in this dialogue about water conservation to make sure that all options are looked at. I think it's pretty clear that the Board of Water Resources, at least some of them, want Bear River development and they want to justify it. But I think there's other parties that want to know if we can avoid it. And I think that the study, obviously, that this body just released is making a clear statement that we should study water conservation. I'm a little, just as a quick announcement about what happened yesterday, the Lake Powell Pipeline comment deadline ended, and 6 western states in the Colorado River Basin wrote a letter to the Secretary of Interior opposing the Lake Powell Pipeline. And one of the things they did was point out the fact that there's no justification for the water because the Washington County community isn't working to conserve water very significantly. The Southern Nevada Water Authority wrote their letter to the Secretary And I think this is really relevant to the discussion. I'm just going to read one sentence from their statement. They said, what the Utah Board of Water Resources characterized as extreme conservation efforts and not practicable, such as converting or installing more efficient landscapes and creating incentive programs for water conservation, are actually commonly applied in an efficient and effective manner in many other communities. So I think we really would be great if we could have a water conservation study that really sort of redefine the boundaries of what we call water conservation, and we don't describe it as extreme. These 6 states are literally threatening to take Utah to court to stop it. And I know this isn't a conversation about the pipeline, but I do think
Zach, we're kind of limited on time. Could you wrap up the comment and let me get to some other questions?
I'm sorry. I just, as being part of those conservation goals last year and seeing us as a community lower our water conservation standards, I just think we need to have the study look at raising conservation goals to 2% or 4% per year. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Any other questions?
Just to
maybe one more.
Just to Zach's question, quickly, that would be a great idea, and if somebody can give us some more money, we'll kind of roll that into a study. But at the present time, we did what we could, and I think the message is, if you look at the chart that Keith had up there that talks about the conservation per capita day, and you see that they're going down, and by going down, you can stay within existing water supplies. That's part of the message that we're trying to get out. Now, if you could conserve more, that would be great. But at least that message is part of the technical analysis that we're putting into this one.
Thanks, Liam. Let me stop it here. That's been a great presentation and good questions and discussion. Shortly, we'll get a copy of the report each of our members and post it on our website. I would like to thank Thane and Keith for their work on the project and for this presentation today. Thank you very much. And I need to put in a thank you to Leland, who was the author of the original proposal, and as the chairman of our research subcommittee, had a great deal to do with making this a meaningful study and project. So thank you, Leland. I would like to entertain a motion to accept this report. That doesn't necessarily mean we're approving every word, just that we're accepting this as the completion of the report.
Don, this is Tom. I'll make that motion.
Tom, is there a second?
Leland will second it.
Thank you, Leland. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay?
Aye.
Any abstentions? So it's unanimous. Thank you. Let me ask, in the interest of time here, our next item on the agenda is public comment. State your name if you're interested in making a public comment here, and I'll determine how to divvy up time. Hearing none, we're back on time. Let's take a few minutes and just among council members themselves, if there are any topics or speakers or subjects you'd like to include on the agenda of our next meeting, any suggestions? You can present them today, or in the interim, you can present them to Laura Vernon. Share them with her. I should mention that our next meeting in November, we need to make decisions on allocation of the funds that we have. As you know, a portion of the Bryan Ship royalty is diverted in the amount of $125,000 for our use. We have one carryover project, the HCR facilitator contract, bridged 2 different fiscal years. And so that project is $37,000. We have $88,000 left to spend. And in order to effectively do that, we need to make a determination of which projects we would like to fund no later than our November meeting. So I guess what I'd recommend is, if you want to suggest any today, that'd be great. And if not, please send a note or an email or a call to Laura, and she'll compile a list and we'll talk about what the options are. I'll note that this report we received today, you didn't show the slide, but there are a number of follow-up studies that could be helpful, and some of those will likely end up on that list. Any suggestions or comments or discussion about that topic? Okay.
Well, this is Dane, and we really didn't get to go through those lists of studies there that we recommended on the end, but maybe I just point out that, as Keith and I have dug through this data, that we really feel it's important. Our priority one is to continue this study and get the data, get more data and more assurance of those projections that we have shown. So that was priority one, and I think it would be good to maintain some momentum on this project as well. And I like Leland's idea of expanding it, all the way down the Wasatch Front. It wouldn't be that hard to do. We only looked at the 4 Bear River Development Project stakeholders, but I think we all know that it's not just those stakeholders that impact the Great Salt Lake. It's the entire Wasatch Front. So priority one, I think, ought to be to continue this study.
What's priority 2?
Priority 2 was, but yeah.
You can hold that if you like.
Okay.
Dave, you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks for that great presentation. And I was just wondering if additional studies could link it more closely to lake levels. Obviously, the big analysis is by conservation. We defer the need for the Bear River project. But does that assume kind of a hold harmless existing condition for Great Salt Lake levels? They're all related, obviously, but our focus here at the commission is on the lake.
Keith or Thane, do you want to chime in on that?
Well, our focus wasn't necessarily on the lake levels, but that definitely is a study to help understand. We put all this effort forward in terms of conservation. What overall impact does that have? We know it can delay large development projects, and we know the impact of those development projects. So I think it's inherent in the continuing study in a certain sense. But you're asking specifically how each entity would affect, each project would affect the Great Salt Lake?
Sorry. Well, of course, you take it collectively, but again, it's all the same issue, so it's maybe not worth breaking out. But I think the Great Salt Lake should be a stakeholder in the analysis.
Well, but David, I would suggest that the study done by Jacobs, the Integrated Water Model study, gave us partially the answer to that already when it showed what level of additional conservation on outside use would possibly be needed in order to arrive at a hold harmless position for the lake. So that in total, we know that it has to be a significant amount of existing conservation. New conservation has to hold the lake harmless. And so individual project studies, I think, would be counterproductive to try and say this one project is a key component of that. That's why looking at the other districts is important, and cities that have major water right holdings to show what levels of conservation they will need to achieve also in order to hold the lake harmless.
And I think one thing we didn't address in our study, Dave, necessarily, that could be addressed in future studies, as you know, as we start conserving ultra high efficiency water use indoor, less water to the POTW. And then if we add reuse to that, then you've got zero flow going to the Great Salt Lake. And so we need to understand the impacts overall of M&I conservation, not just the fact that it's going to delay a project, but what does it do to the groundwater? What does it do to the stormwater contributions, and then the POTW contributions? So that wasn't necessarily addressed in the scope of our project, though it is in there in the list of studies of something that would be looked at.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Any other thoughts from council members about projects, topics? Please, if you have some, come up in the next few weeks, please share those with Laura. Any from outside the advice? Same thing, please share those with Laura. Okay, the next meeting on our schedule is November 11. Laura pointed out to me that that is both a state and a federal holiday. It's Veterans Day. I recommended that we change that meeting date from the 11th to either the 4th or the 18th. Mindful, particularly for our elected official county commissioners, that they have some fixed schedules and meetings. I wonder if Jeff, are you still on the line, or Randy, comment on if we move one way or another, if that impacts your schedules?
I believe the 18th, we will be in St. George. That's our annual conference for the Utah Association of Counties.
Okay, how about the 4th?
I'm good on the 4th. We have commission meeting, but it's later in the evening. So if it's around this time of the day, that works for me.
I would propose then that we move our meeting from November from the 11th to the 4th. Any other objection to that? So done. Thank you. Thank you all for participating. We again went over 40 people. I appreciate your interest in the lake. Advisory Council members, we had 10 out of 11 here, and I appreciate your participation very much. And again, Diane and Keith, thanks for your work and your report, and we'll follow up with you on getting that finalized. Any other comments by Advisory Council members or other business? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Joe, did I hear you make that motion?
I make a motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jeff. Any debate or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed, nay?
Goodbye.
It's unanimous. Thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you.